And I tell them your goal is not to have them put the knife down. Your goal is not to have them free the hostages. Your goal is to build a bond. And I think that once you have a bond, then you've got influence on somebody, because we don't listen to strangers. We don't listen to people that we don't value or have relationships with. Once we have that connection with somebody, then we become very powerful in the messages that we deliver.
That's Scott Tillema talking about the primary objective of his model that he relies on in negotiations. By purposely building a bond, we then create the ability to influence. Scott is a nationally recognized leader in the field of crisis and hostage negotiations, passionately training thousands of police negotiators across the country in verbal influence. He's developed a powerful model for safely resolving crisis situations, which is now being recognized and adapted by the private sector for his use in sales, communication, influence, and leadership. In this episode of Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, Scott talks about the FBI's staircase hostage negotiation model, the role of emotion in negotiation and how to address them, active listening, the need for creating autonomy as a negotiation strategy, the importance of gaining experience through scenario-based training, the best way to create the ability to influence, the power dynamics within hostage and crisis negotiations, the overlap between hostage and business negotiations, the importance of relying on a framework during challenging conversations, and much more.
This is Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, podcast of the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Warren. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
So I've read a short bio of yours at the start, but can you, in your own words, just provide a bit of information about your background and how you became interested in crisis and hostage negotiations?
Sure. Yeah. Again, my name is Scott Tillema. I'm an active duty law enforcement officer in the Chicago area here in the United States. My passion is crisis and hostage negotiation. And it probably began with my interest in people, but I formally studied behavioral science in undergrad, and my graduate degree is in psychology. So it's the educational backgrounds that you would expect for somebody who is going to be dealing with people and verbal influence at a high level. I was trained by the FBI in 2007 in the art and science of hostage and crisis negotiation. I've received some additional training at the Harvard University Program on Negotiation and IMD Business School, along with some of the world's top hostage negotiators. And it's truly my passion to share the concepts and the principles of crisis and hostage negotiation with police officers who are on the front lines doing life or death work. And now it's expanded into training in the private sector as well. I've started a group called the Negotiations Collective based out of Vancouver with a few folks from Canada. And we're doing some corporate training all around negotiations and having a great time.
Wonderful. You mentioned the art and science of negotiation through the FBI training. I hope we can revisit that. For now, I'd like to talk a bit about the value of this training. I'm sure it would be of value to every on-duty police officer. So can you talk a bit more about the additional training you received in addition to being an officer? And I guess an extension of that is, do you see value in making this standard training for all officers as well?
Yeah, truly, it's becoming standard training. We, as a profession, are starting, and some of us have been there for a very long time, but some of the holdouts are finally starting to come around and put a great premium on verbal influence and how we can talk with people to avoid use of force situations. And, that's always our goal, to resolve situations peacefully. But when you call in for a SWAT team, now we're talking, it's not just a normal everyday interaction. This is truly a situation where you have someone who is threatening harm to themselves, threatening harm to others, holding people hostage. And we need people who can come in and do this professionally to find a peaceful resolution. And the initial training with the FBI it's a 40-hour full week training where you learn the FBI behavioral change staircase. And this isn't classified information or anything like this. Your listeners can log on to Google and Google that phrase and see their behavioral change staircase. And it has a process of active listening, which we can go into in a little bit, the 8 skills of active listening, which is really kind of foundational for crisis and hostage negotiators, and talk about empathy and rapport building and influence up to behavioral change. And really it's kind of intense because you are on stage in front of your peers and kind of sitting in a back-to-back setting, and you're forced to really listen. And it's very different because all of us are used to listening. We're talking to somebody face to face, and the work that police do, we see each other on the street. We don't do, distance interaction. So it's very different where we need to focus on listening. And that's where I was introduced to the 8 skills of active listening. And it really changes how you communicate, because I think most people have the belief that to be great negotiator, you have to be a smooth talker. And yes, there is something to that, but it's really much more focused on being a great listener and trying to understand what the problem is before we try to go ahead and solve it.
Right. So I want to revisit that as well, the staircase, perhaps in a bit. Now, let's just back up a bit. And can you just give me a general idea of the types of situations you're encountering? I'm sure everyone has their ideas of what a hostage and crisis negotiator does, but just an overview of sort of the situations you're encountering.
Yeah, and it's not quite like Hollywood. There's not so much explosions and one superhero negotiator. It's especially now in 2021, we see a lot of people in crisis, and rarely in the US, and that extends to Canada as well, do we see hostage taking. We just don't see that very much domestically. When we do, it's in the context of like an expressive, emotional, domestic related incident. It's just extremely rare to get a purposeful hostage taking. Right. From time to time, you run into an incidental hostage taking, which is like the bank robbery gone bad, or the convenience store that's being robbed and a police officer happens to drive by, and you have an offender who is really disorganized, and the best idea he can come up with at the time is, let me just take everybody hostage and try and buy some time and figure out what it is I'm going to do. But a majority of our work as police, crisis, and hostage negotiators is dealing with an individual subject. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that person's in crisis because they're suicidal, they're threatening harm to themselves. Sometimes they're subject to arrest, and they turn into like an armed barricaded subject where they have a knife or a gun or some other type of weapon, and they're barricaded in a room or in a home or in a building somewhere where we can't get to them because of threats that they're making toward law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And really, that's a majority of the work that we're doing, having a conversation with a single individual who is going through a difficult time, and we're working to resolve that situation peacefully.
Now, I imagine one of the critical differences in these situations between a crisis negotiation and other negotiations people would be familiar with would be the intensity, the emotional intensity. So the urgency and the pressing risk, both to the offender themselves and to your team. So can we talk about emotions for a little bit here? There's a lot of literature about high arousal emotional states and its effects on cognition. For example, anger can increase risk-taking behavior. Now, how important is it for you? Do you make it a priority to dampen the emotional intensity when you arrive on a scene? So is that a priority of yours?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you've got it right on. And we could spend the next 8 hours talking about the importance of emotion within negotiations. And I think that this is probably the most important thing, because I believe that we make decisions based on emotion. And all the people who believe I make decisions based on logic and reasoning, and I'm a really smart individual, and emotions don't play into the process of making decisions, I think they're wrong, and they'd be surprised at knowing how much emotions influence us. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's really important that those people who are negotiating, whether it be in crisis or hostage negotiation or business negotiation, really spend time understanding emotion. And in our situations, you have somebody who is truly very emotionally upset for one reason or another. So a lot of our time is working on getting them to a position where they can even hear us and process what we're saying, so we can get them to a point to make a good decision. And we don't want them to be making decisions early on in that negotiation, because emotions are up and down and they are very intense. And I think back to a hostage situation that our team negotiated. The hostage taker, when he initially started having the first negotiation with the first police officer, was in such an emotional state that he was actually vomiting as he was having the conversation with that negotiator. And nobody out there thinks that, maybe he's suffering from the stomach flu or something like that. It's really insightful to see how powerful the emotions are, that not only does it mess with his ability to think clearly, but it's now taken over his bodily actions and how he can even control himself. So imagine somebody trying to make a thoughtful decision about their life when they can't even control basic bodily functions. So we spend a lot of time trying to control emotion and speaking to emotion, and focusing on some, the core concerns of emotion that have been written about by some of the great Harvard professors.
Yeah, so definitely a priority there, and that's working on regulating their emotions. I guess let's bring this into the staircase. Then is it that important a topic that it's actively that it's built into the staircase model, or is it how is it integrated? Is it integrated into the stairgate model?
Yeah, and maybe I can introduce this thought. When I teach negotiations, I actually use a bit of a different approach than the FBI model, and I have nothing but respect for the FBI model. I was trained by the FBI. I still teach for the FBI. I was teaching a class for FBI Chicago last week, so I have a ton of respect for what they have and what they present. But when I teach negotiation, I teach it a bit differently. I teach a 4-principle approach of understanding, timing, delivery, and respect. And each one of these pieces really kind of hones in on the emotional piece. And for example, timing is about your strategy and when you're going to deliver the message. And we're not going to go for the big ask here if we haven't touched on emotions. And when we talk about delivery, I have 5 pieces of delivery that all kind of play into creating a feeling within somebody. And this is driving to emotions. And I talk about respect, which is the concepts of fairness and autonomy and empathy and perspective. And all of this comes back to, can we put ourselves in the other person's shoes and feel what they feel? So we're really trying to connect on that emotional level. And these 4 principles, that when I teach that, I see it, I visualize it differently than the staircase. And my concern with the staircase with a bunch of type A personalities is that you start at the bottom and your goal is to get to the top. And if you're like I am, you're going to run up those stairs just as fast as you can, because we're problem solvers. This is what we need to do. This is our goal. And I've done that. And when I do reality-based training scenarios with law enforcement officers here today, I still see officers who go right to the top, to that behavioral change. And if I jump out of the car and I've got a knife to my throat, or I'm holding a gun, we go right to drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, put the knife down, put the knife down. And that's good initially. But if that doesn't work, now what? Now, what are we doing? Now, what's the process and the model? So when I see these 4 principles, I see them in a circle. I want your listeners to visualize a circle, and these principles go around and around rather than a start to finish. And I say it's important that we see this visually, that there's no end to this. So what's our purpose if we're just going around and around? And what that circle is to me is it signifies the bond that we want to create with these people in crisis. And again, going back to the emotion, we are driving toward connection. And I tell them, your goal is not to have them put the knife down. Your goal is not to have them free the hostages. Your goal is to build a bond. And I think that once you have a bond, then you've got influence on somebody. because we don't listen to strangers. We don't listen to people that we don't value or have relationships with. Once we have that connection with somebody, then we become very powerful in the messages that we deliver.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot there. Where do we go here? So let's go to the staircase. So if I understand this correctly, emotions aren't built in as much as you've done into your 4-step process, but the one of your I don't know if the word's too strong, one of your criticisms is that you correct me if I'm wrong, but the staircase is a sort of a stepwise ascending process where you're trying to get a behavioral change at that final step. And the stairs are, I've got their active listening, empathy, rapport, influence, and then you get that behavioral change at the end. And you're finding that when people are trying to implement this, they're jumping to that behavioral change step and saying, put the gun down, and the other steps are sort of glossed over if addressed at all.
Right.
And your circular 4-step model is sort of a more active process with more flexibility and attempting to focus on with emotion built into all these steps of, and again, I wrote these down, the understanding, timeline, delivery, and respect, with the goal of creating a bond. And that bond is how you get that final step. That's how you influence people, is creating that bond. Do I have that right, or is that
right? And
yeah.
I'm not the FBI behavioral change staircase. That's the gold model, and the gold standard in police negotiation. Everybody should know that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just when I present it, there's a mindset that goes with how I see this. That your end goal is not behavioral change. Your end goal is a connection, is that bond, and active listening is absolutely critical, and we can talk about active listening for hours because it's so important, and that's where the FBI starts. But when this model was created in maybe the 80s, it's been around for 30 years. We have done most of our police negotiation by phone, and it's 2021. Our communication has changed since then. And I think what they meant by this was, let's try to understand what's going on. Let's get a good appreciation of what's happening here. But in 2021, now we're communicating across the world by Zoom all the time. So should we consider not just the skills of active listening and broaden that out? Maybe do we need to consider studying body language? Should we study expressions and micro expressions and gestures? And now that we can see each other, our communication is much more 3D. So I really challenge these negotiators that you need to bring in a whole nother level of skill set that you didn't even need to think about back in the 80s when we were doing negotiations by phone.
Right.
And I worked with this regional SWAT team in the Chicago area for over 7 years. And I can count on one hand the times that I did a forward negotiation, which means that I'm up there face to face with somebody having this conversation. It just doesn't happen very often. And then, okay, we now need to consider our body language and our gestures and studying theirs as well. But a lot of this just traditionally was done by phone. So communication has evolved. Right. How we communicate has evolved. And it has to be more than just active listening, nonverbal attending. All these things really go into how somebody feels about you, feels about the situation, and impacts the decision that they're about to make. And when lives are on the line, we need to be this good. We can't be relying on the old way of doing things.
Are you comfortable unpacking your 4-step process there? Perhaps I know it's probably complex, and maybe we could keep with that emotional theme, understanding, timing, delivery, respect. Are there some clear tips or strategies in there to impact the emotional climate?
Yeah, of course. And maybe with understanding, let's take 2 of the most important active listening skills and maybe just focus on those. Okay. And first is asking open-ended questions, having good open-ended questions, because your power in negotiation, whether it be business, political, or law enforcement, your power in negotiation comes from information and options. And that's a little bit hurtful to people who think they're really great communicators and smooth talkers. I mean, your tactics at the table, that's really important, and that can easily break your deal. But you want information about the other side. I mean, that's where we're going to get really powerful, and that comes with asking good questions. And even before this, if you have time to prepare and do some good research on somebody, let's do that. But asking good questions is really important, and we should have a number of go-to open-ended questions which help elicit information. And then another really important active listening skill is emotion labeling. So a lot of times we get in trouble because we want to reply to the content of what somebody is actually saying to us. And this is how arguments start. And we need to stay focused. What's your mission? What's your purpose? Why are you having this negotiation in the first place? And does it serve you to go down a tangent with somebody else, arguing over what somebody's saying? And particularly when things get heated, I find it really important to do the emotion label, to say, you know what, you sound really sad about that, or you sound very angry about this, and connecting with them at the emotional level. And they'll let you know if you're getting it right, and they'll let you know if you're getting it wrong. And we very dismissively say to people when we're in a rush that, hey, I understand, I understand. But that's such a terrible thing to say to somebody, because we don't understand. I haven't been in your shoes. I haven't experienced what you've experienced. And the truth is, the really impactful, painful moments that we all experience are not things that we openly share with others. So there's a lot of pain that we need to find and say, what problem is it we're solving? So let's work to understand what the issue is. And with the timing, it's just about knowing when to deliver the message. And have we taken time to thoughtfully listen first? I know in business negotiation, the concept of anchoring would come into play. Maybe if we have a lot of information and we know the setting here, maybe we put down our dollar amount or put down our figure first, because anchoring has been shown to be incredibly effective. So think about your timing of when you're going to deliver the message and how you're going to be most effective with your strategy piece. Mm-hmm. With delivery, I say, you know, the principle here is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I don't want anyone to take that out of context and say, you know what, I listened to Scott talk and he says that I can say anything I want as long as I say it nicely, we're going to be just fine. And that's not the case, because we need to use our words to frame what it is we're saying. And you have the very same incident on the conservative news network and the liberal news network, and they're going to frame it entirely differently with the words you're going to use. And you need to be careful that you don't want to lose credibility, because once you lose credibility as a negotiator, you're in big trouble. Sometimes your word is all you've got. So you have to guard your credibility. But with delivery, I think that we always remember how we feel about a person or about a situation. Your listeners are not going to reflect on this conversation with you and I in a couple months and be able to jot down from memory a lot of different details, but they'll remember the emotion. So, you know what, that was very interesting, or that was very intriguing to me, or this was terribly boring, or this was not my thing. Everyone will remember how we felt. So how do we generate that? And I think that in our delivery, and we set it up, the team maybe to step back in a crisis negotiation, it's not just me on the phone. If I'm the primary negotiator, I have a coach working with me. There's a team lead. There's somebody jotting down information. There's somebody working in intelligence and building information. So I'm surrounded by a team to give us every advantage that we have. And the coach needs to be working with me to make sure that my delivery is correct. The aspects of delivery that we need to consider: the rate, the rhythm, the pressure, the volume, and the tone of what we are saying. And we also need to study that from the other side, because that's going to be giving us information. If all of a sudden we hear somebody's words get very pressured, or they get very rushed, or now they slow down, we're always going to be studying the differences and what has changed, what just happened? What did we trigger that is revealing there's something here that needs to be explored a little bit further? And then respect is about, yes, being respectful, but it's really kind of drilling down on the emotion of, am I being treated fairly? Is my autonomy being respected? And this is a big piece that we're still working through COVID, and over the last year and a half, how many of us have truly experienced a loss of autonomy and freedom? And that's probably everybody. I don't know anyone that hasn't been affected in the last year and a half. And we really value this all of a sudden. And not to say we didn't value autonomy before, but I would argue this is the most important thing that we need to consider right now when we're talking about emotional triggers, because we all have opinions on, I want to be free to travel to Canada or to Europe. Just last week, I had a speaking engagement in Switzerland canceled, citing COVID travel restrictions. So things that weren't there 2 years ago are now impacting us and our lives. So instead of really pushing as a negotiator, let's give them the autonomy to choose and give them multiple choices and say, here's a couple different options. Which one of these might work best? Because we are fighting. Every one of us is fighting for autonomy. In my state, in Illinois right now, we are still required to wear masks inside of buildings at the orders of the governor. And there is a huge portion of the population that absolutely hates that and is fighting against that because it's an autonomy trigger. I don't have the freedom over my own life. So let's be incredibly focused on giving people their autonomy when we're making decisions. So that's a brief overview of the 4 principles that I put forth when I'm sharing negotiation tactics and strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see how all the pieces work together to contribute to the building the emotional climate that you want there. Is that's for someone else? How about yourself though, or the team? Are there any strategies you use to control your own emotions or of the teams?
Yeah, and this comes with time. As a new person to a really emotionally engaging situation, we're going to have the new negotiators spend a lot of time practicing. Scenario-based training is really important to allow them to understand what are their triggers, what gets them upset. Because as soon as someone figures out which buttons they can push on you to elicit an emotional response, you're in trouble. Because now you're not in command anymore. You are now reacting instead of acting, and we need to stay in the driver's seat. So this all comes from practice and getting comfortable with stressful situations. So even before we get to that, let's make sure it's a bit of stress inoculation, and that's what I enjoy doing coaching with young people, both in law enforcement and beyond it, to say, let's get comfortable managing your stress levels and let me crank up the pressure on you a little bit and let you get comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. Get comfortable with stress, get comfortable with silence. And in the heat of the moment, though, it's always going to trigger a bit of that stimulus. The adrenaline is going to be pumping. And I still today, having been in law enforcement for 19 years, I'm out there training our new folks and coaching them as they're developing. And you get an exciting call and you get that shot of adrenaline. Hey, we got something big going on. And I think one of the most important things that we need to do is realize that we need to take a moment and bring control back to our body and bring thinking. And that begins with breathing. And in law enforcement and military, we refer to it as tactical breathing. I've also heard it called box breathing, where you're going to breathe in to the count of 4, 2, 3, 4. You're taking a deep breath. You're going to hold it. 2, 3, 4, and we're going to release it. 2, 3, 4, and now we're going to hold. 2, 3, 4. Mm-hmm. And when I do that, my hands just are making a square. I'm going up, across, down, across, And we're going to do that a couple repetitions of that tactical breathing and throw in a couple deep breaths after each cycle. And that's going to allow the brain to start functioning again. And it's referred to as the amygdala hijack, where instinctively it triggers the fight or flight reaction, which keeps us alive. And our ancestors, it's kept them alive so they could reproduce, and we're here today. And it's important that we use that when we need to. It helps keep us alive in law enforcement in very quick situations. But when we have the time to control ourselves and initiate that tactical breathing, it's going to allow us a little bit of time to think and get the blood moving back to all the parts of the body and get our brain thinking again, and allow that good, thoughtful piece of the brain to kick back in so we can make good decisions rather than just the emotional, instinctive decisions, which sometimes might not best serve us.
Mm-hmm. Simple but powerful technique there. Let's return to your circle, the 4-step circle. The goal, you said, was to create a bond, and through that bond is how you gain influence. Now, are you monitoring whether the bond is intact, and whether it's time to change your strategy now that there's an increasing bond? So are you actively monitoring the extent of the bond that's being created?
Yeah, of course you need to, because you can't come out and say, "Hey, do you feel like we've got a bond here?" I mean, that's a little bit awkward now, isn't it? But you'll hear, especially in these emotional situations where the speech is very rushed, it's very loud, it's very pressured. Mm-hmm. You see the pressure coming off. You see the rate coming down a little bit, because we're creating for them a little bit of psychological safety, that they know I'm not going to be yelling at them or screaming or threatening them, that every time they come back at me, they're going to get a very predictable, very comfortable, very safe response, which is going to allow them to open up a little bit. And truly, we want them to mirror us. And the research is out there that it's very, very difficult for you to be yelling and screaming at me for a long time if I continue to respond down here. And a little bit softer, a little bit slower, maybe even a little bit deeper presentation to you. And we want them to start to mirror us. And we're setting a good example for them. And while we're doing that, we are being great listeners to let them know, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing what you're saying. And I'm engaging. I'm asking you follow-up questions. And you don't need to scream to be heard. And a lot of times when we're dealing with people in crisis, we will hear from them that no one has ever listened to me before. I've never had anyone care about me or what I'm saying until you, this negotiator. Mm-hmm. And we become very skilled at creating that. But it's almost becoming easier because we as a society are becoming worse at this. I mean, we have just gravitated to the all about me social media. One of my connections just put 79 pictures in a single social media posting, and my head almost exploded. I said, what in the world? Where are we at that you are so important that you need to share with the world 79 pictures of what? And it wasn't even a particularly interesting event, whatever it was. It's so notable, I can't even remember that. So we're in this me generation, and this everybody's in it for themselves, and everybody's at crisis. You have the Democrats, the Republicans, conservatives, liberals, the vaccinators, the anti-vaccinators, the maskers, the anti-maskers. Everybody is really, really at odds with each other, and nobody takes the time to say, you know what, Warren, tell me more. Tell me more about what you believe. Or, you know what, this is interesting. What makes you ask that? Or that's interesting. What makes you say this? And truly allow somebody to share their position. And we'll see those changes when that bond is starting to form. We'll see those changes. And on occasion, you'll get someone to finally kind of break down and ask us, so what do I have to do here? So what do I need? And now you are in that coaching position. And again, we're not going to tell them you need to do this, but maybe, you've said that these are your interests. This is what's important to you, whatever it might be, their reputation, their money, their children, their family. And we're going to steer them toward making a decision that is aligned with their interest. To say, you have an opportunity here to make this decision for you, for your future, which is going to support whatever goal we're trying to get to here, rather than saying, I want you to surrender and come out with your hands up. Because we have to bear in mind, in negotiations, there's always a winner and there's always a loser. And we never, ever win our negotiations. Not to say we failed every crisis negotiation. That's not it. It's that we don't win. We're not the winner, because if we come out the winner, then they're the loser. So we don't use words like surrender or you have to do this. Maybe something for you to consider is this, or this could be very much aligned with what you're trying to do. And we present that in a way that they can make that decision, because we still need the follow through. We still need the implementation of the agreement. And we see this in some business negotiations where people say, yes, I'm going to do that, because they feel forced into it, or they were forced into it. But now the implementation is going to be really lousy because I'm not behind it. This is not my idea. My boss told me what to do and how to do it, and I disagree with everything that they came up with. So I'm not going to give it a full effort. So bear in mind, we still need to implement the deal that was agreed to. And for us, sometimes that just means, hey, you need to put the weapon down and come out of the house, and we're going to have a chat when you get out here. But in some other negotiations, the implementation is much, much more complex, which is why we have to make sure that they're thoughtfully choosing to engage in this agreement.
So you mentioned giving them options or presenting options for them. And that's something you talked about earlier about being a source of power. And also you mentioned them as the bonds forming and as trust is being built, them actually saying to you, what do I have to do to get out of here or whatnot? So there's a sense of control, trust, and power dynamics that are changing throughout your circle process there. Can you talk about power dynamics in general? Having the power to threaten to harm yourself or to harm your team, that's an instant source of power for an offender. Are you actively looking to shift the balance of power? Are you trying to give them a sense of control to maintain their power? How do you view the power dynamics within these processes?
Yeah, we certainly want to give them the sense that they're in control.
The sense, yes.
To help them feel like you are in control. But the truth is, in a real negotiation, the other side does have some control. And that's tough for negotiators to admit. But it's really easy to understand, because I would say if we are 100% in control, why am I even talking to you? Why don't I just go and do whatever I want to do then? We have to realize that this other side, there's a reason we're at the table with them, because they have something that we want. And that's why we need to frame a negotiation as, this is my negotiation partner. This is not my negotiation opponent, because it's not me against you. I need you to get whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish here. And it's really powerful that when you tell someone, hey, you're in control of this and we are not, but we're in control of this piece over here. No longer does this person have to spend any time or energy demonstrating their authority or power or control of a situation. And I've seen that where I've negotiated with people who start firing off guns just for what purpose? They're to assert that they still have some control over their situation. And that's a very powerful thing. It's an incredibly powerful symbol to have a gun and then to be firing a gun. I mean, what a sense of power. And we let them know, hey, you're in control. I can't control what's going on your side of the table, but realize that we're in control out here. And there are limits to that. And sometimes we just need to remind them that, yes, you have that, but there's limits. And if you go too far, that can be an issue for you. And we're going to educate them. We're not going to threaten them on that, because we don't want to. We don't want to damage the relationship that we're trying to build with them. But of course, you want to be powerful. We want to increase our information. We want to increase our options, and we are going to give them the information that is going to drive them toward making the decision we want them to make. And we're going to try to limit their options. However that might be in your particular negotiation, that's how we're going to continue to push power to our side and put us in the best situation that we can win.
There's the theory of the substantive versus peripheral issues. I think this is based out of hostage negotiations, where a substantive issue is something where they're something directly related to the actual conflict. So I want a getaway car or something like that. Whereas the peripheral issues would be, I'm hungry, send in 5 boxes of pizza. And then there's sort of this idea that during escalation, there's a very sort of solidified stance on the substantive issues, and then these peripheral issues are increasing. I want pizza, and I want you to release my buddy Joe from jail and whatnot. And then de-escalation, there's these decreasing peripheral issues, and then sort of a loosening of grip on the substantive issues. So it's an interesting theory, and it sort of makes sense as they're losing control. They're sort of like, well, how do I just get out of here, right? And they're less concerned about getting that pizza and more concerned about getting out of there. It's an interesting theory that I've seen sort of at the negotiation table as well, as people shift their interests on the issues, dropping certain issues and whatnot. Is this something you see in negotiations as well? Does this theory hold up?
We don't see a lot of purposeful hostage taking. So, I mean, real briefly, we got 3 kind of categories that we're working with in law enforcement, and corrections is kind of going to be different here. But the purposeful hostage taking, where you do have a substantive demand, the incidental hostage taking, and the domestic emotional hostage taking. And those last 2, that comprises the majority of hostage situations that any team domestically in the US and Canada would be negotiating. And there really aren't a lot of substantive demands there, that it's really an emotional situation. And that's what's kind of driving their process. And so the biggest asset that we're going to have is time, because no one's going to be able to hold an intense emotional position for a long time. But I think that some of those smaller issues are the important issues. And some people really disagree with me on this next point. But if somebody says, you know what, I want pizza and I want some water in here, I'm of the mindset that I want to give that to you right away. And I'm even going to ask you, where do you want your pizza from? Do you want a thin crust? You like deep dish? What kind of toppings do you want? And I'm going to give you exactly that. And a lot of people will argue that and say, no, I'm not going to give you anything until I get something in return. Okay, you can try that. And I'm not opposed to that. Hey, you know what? Would you be willing to give me a little something and I can get you this? But I make much better decisions if I'm well fed. And my basic needs, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this triangle, if your basic needs aren't being met, you're not going to be able to do some of these better and bigger things in life. So why not give them a pizza and a few bottles of water? I mean, what's that going to cost us? $25 maybe? It's going to be nothing if we can safely get that to them. I spent many years working as a detective, and I would sit people down to interview them about criminal acts that they committed, that should they admit this to me, it might not be very good for their immediate freedom in their future. And I would never have an issue of saying, hey, can I get you something to drink? All we have is water back here, but back at my desk, I got a Coke or, something else if you'd rather have a soft drink. Yeah. And again, it's a great step in saying, you know what, we're building rapport, we're building that connection. And when we are more comfortable, we open up a little bit.
Yeah.
And you have to be very mindful that when you're dealing with a good negotiator, they're going to get you comfortable and they're going to get you talking. about things that maybe you don't want to talk about. And this is, again, building that emotional comfort, that psychological safety to get them talking. And it turns out those little things, those peripheral things that you mentioned, become really, really important. Mm-hmm. Hey, why did you end up talking to me? Well, you gave me something to drink, or you were decent with me. You got me something to eat. And why not even offer that? Hey, Warren, you and I have been talking here for 5 hours. Do we need to take a break for a few minutes? Do you need to use the restroom? Or I know you're kind of surrounded in there right now by these officers, but can I grab you something to eat? Because I'm getting hungry. And now we're forming a bond. I mean, this is just basic stuff. I'm getting hungry for lunch. How about you? Maybe it's lunchtime and you could use a sandwich as well. Let me facilitate that for you. Let me get that. So these small things turn into the big things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly won't disagree with you on that one. I mean, as a negotiation strategy, trade-offs and concessions for issues that are of less importance for you is an essential strategy, right? And the idea of actually coming out and offering it, that's a nice approach as well. So yeah, no pushback on that one, that's for sure. Let's just shift gears here a bit to ethics. When we talk about ethics in negotiation, using our power to persuade people and whatnot, it's a bit of a challenging one. And I think a good general principle is just to consider the long game, consider our reputation, how we treat others. It follows us, right? So if we're deceitful and manipulative, there's going to be consequences down the line. But in these situations, do you loosen your ethical grip for hostage negotiations? Because there's lives on the line. What do you consider the ethical obligations of hostage negotiators to be?
I'm of the mindset that we have to be ethical. And I teach negotiators, do not lie. You don't want to lie, because just from a strategy standpoint, if you get caught in that lie, you've lost your credibility, and now you're no good to us as a negotiator. Now our whole side is compromised. So I don't need a huge bond of trust to do a deal with somebody, but I need just enough that I'm willing to take a chance and willing to take a risk to say, all right, let's make this agreement happen. So you don't want to be seen as not credible. And if you get caught in a lie, you're done. Yes. And you don't want to give up your credibility for anything. So I think that's just a standing rule. And if negotiators and teams need to make a decision because a life is immediately in the balance, there's someone that's about to be killed, I think that's always of the highest value. And we need to do everything we can to protect human life and make sure that everybody goes home safely. So if there's a scenario or a situation that, an individual negotiator team says, hey, we need to stretch the truth here a little bit, that's a decision that they need to make. And hopefully it's with the focus on, we need to get this person home safely. And maybe we have an opportunity to do that. Now, I'm not saying that we need to be naive and dump everything on the table and say, let me put all the cards out here and let you know that over your left shoulder, there's a sniper who's looking at you through the window. And then the entry team has a bunch of tear gas that they're ready to drop in through the ceiling from up above. Right. And, go through this. I mean, that's silliness. And there's some folks out there who say, you know what, we have to put everything on the table and be trusting and be wide open. And I'm just not of that mindset. I don't think you're going to have a lot of a crisis and hostage negotiators who are going to subscribe to, let's just put it all on the table and find where we can be creative and get the most value out of it. That's just not the background that I come from. But at the same time, don't lie. Don't give up your credibility. And these go on for a long time. I mean, I've been involved in very, very long negotiations. And for people, all of us have told a lie at some point. It's tough to keep that straight. It's tough to not mistake it or say the wrong thing or, do something that's in contrast to what we said earlier. It just makes your life a lot easier. Be straight and be good. Be good enough at your craft of negotiation and influence that you don't need to lie. That you're skilled enough to get the verbal influence you need with the rules of the game.
Right on. You're sought after as a trainer in hostage negotiations. And we've sort of been talking about this throughout, how these skills are transferable and that you train in the corporate sphere as well. Can you talk about the overlap here specifically? Are you teaching the exact same thing at both tables or not?
No, because the rules are different. In business negotiation, I don't think that snipers are an option. Although I've worked with enough business teams that a lot of people say, I wish I had a little bit more variety of options to resolve some of these negotiations. So the rules are different, and the process is a bit different, but the concept of connecting is really, really important. And like I mentioned earlier, your tactics at the table are not probably going to be what wins you your negotiation or secures you a good deal. It's going to have a lot of information and know the landscape of what else is out there and know your options and say, hey, this person or these people or this company is really the best option for us to do deals with. But your tactics at the table can absolutely wreck your deal. Mm-hmm. That if you're not a likable person, if you're not genuine, if you're being seen as arrogant or fake or really offensive, even if you are the best option, a lot of people will be willing to make an emotional decision, say, I'm not dealing with this person because I don't like them, or they're not treating me fairly, or they're not giving me space to make my own decisions. So even though this may be a small piece of the negotiation process, the tactics at the table, the connection, the bonding, the dialogue, without this, there's no chance you can ever get the deal done. There's just no way, because as soon as we are emotionally triggered in a negative way, there are examples after examples of people who are willing to make really poor financial decisions for themselves or for their company because it's out of principle. I am not going to let this person get the win. I am not going to be treated like this. I'm going to take a stand for what I believe in. And I am not going to let me and my people be treated like this by this person because we can save a couple dollars.
Right. So your 4-step circle model. Sorry, is there a better? Have you named this model, or is it?
Yeah, I call it principle-based negotiation, but initially it's the secrets model of negotiation, and secrets is an acronym that we use to teach the very beginners of crisis negotiation. But really, I've evolved to more of a principle-based approach because it gives us a little flexibility, it gives us agility, and as soon as you have a plan that we're going to do this, then this, you're in a lot of trouble when step one doesn't go according to plan, or we don't even get to step one. Now what? Let's have that flexible framework. So I call it the secrets model of negotiation. And it's really now focused over the last many years on these principles to have principle-based negotiation. And that'll give you the framework, yet the flexibility to navigate through even the most difficult conversations.
Right. So that one, though, does apply to your corporate training as well. The understanding, the considerations of the timeline, delivery, and respect. Those are the key fundamental lessons.
Yeah, there's very few pieces within those that are not something that I discuss when we sit down and do corporate training. And we might have a little bit of a different spin to it. Perhaps the stories aren't immediately transferable, but the concepts are. Right. The concepts are right on. And I'll ask the teams that I'm working with, so tell me about your difficult negotiation and how might this apply? How did you, consider your delivery? And, maybe that could mean, hey, we sent an email when it should have been a discussion. It was a discussion on the phone when it should have been a face-to-face. And we go through these, and for the people that we're working with, they say, yes, this makes sense. And I can't wait to try this and have these considerations next time we're going through our negotiations.
Okay. Let's leave the corporate world for a second and return to hostage negotiation and consider things from and I know this is a less common circumstance, but from a hostage perspective, and maybe we can extend this to anyone being in a situation where they're they feel like a hostage. There's a drastic power differential where they're hopelessly underpowered, right? Can you speak about some best practices that a hostage or someone in the situation can take to either help them remain safe, or even touch on some of the psychology here, the tips on the mindset to make it through these experiences, and or then even perhaps afterwards, dealing with the trauma and moving forward.
Yeah. If you're a actual hostage, you're dehumanized. You are a pawn in what somebody else is trying to do. So you want to humanize yourself. I mean, if you're literally a hostage, you're going to humanize yourself. Here's my name. Here's who I am. Here's everything about me, because it's really, really tough to kill or to hurt someone who is a person who you have more knowledge of. It's really a little bit easier to do if they're a nameless, faceless person from a great distance. But the figurative, hey, I'm stuck here. What do I do? There's a power differential. A lot of us negotiate from position, like positional based negotiation. And let's move to interest based negotiation and say, what is it you're trying to do here? And where do I fit into that? How can I help you achieve whatever your goal is and whatever it is you are trying to do? And I think that once we move away from positions and we say, well, why do you want to buy this orange, rather than I want to buy this orange and it's going to be $3. No, it's going to be $4. And we're stuck in this position. But why do you want to buy this orange? Or why do you want to do business with us? Or why is it important that your terms are like this? Now we're moving into a more comprehensive exploration of, I can support you, even though you seem to have the power. You're in this great position and I'm not. How can I partner with you to help get you what it is you want? You want to achieve this. This is what I can offer to help you achieve this. And then maybe that helps you mentally come back into the fold when you realize that your interests are aligned, or at least in a certain area. You're stuck at a job that you don't like. How are your interests aligned with helping the company or your group succeed?
Even when you're fundamentally underpowered, whatever the situation, if you return to interest-based negotiation, you're going to get the best results, not only for the negotiation, but psychologically as well.
Right. Keep focus on that dialogue, having good dialogue, and that connection and that bonding, because it really becomes a little bit more difficult to say no to the people who have spent some time building a relationship with me and talking to me and getting to know me and allowing me to get to know them. And they come in for the ask, hey, we'd really like you to do some negotiation training for us, but we can't pay your fee. We don't have that. It becomes a little bit more difficult to say no when that bond is there and when there is dialogue and you realize that this is what they want negotiations training for, and say, you know what? Well, I believe in that too. So maybe we need to knock this fee down so we can bring this training to you. And time again, that's really effective. And there's certainly going to be situations where it's not effective, where it may not work. But don't let that be an excuse for anyone who says, I'm not going to spend the time trying to build that relationship, identifying who the decision makers are, engaging in that strategic networking to put us in a position to be in front of a decision maker and really making the pitch and making the ask.
Right. Okay, we're getting near the end of our time here. I could keep going for quite a bit here, but any final thoughts or tips that you could leave with us today?
Yeah, under stress, things become very different. And that's an important lesson that I learned as a crisis and hostage negotiator, that right now we're having a chat. We're very calm, we're creative, we're having good discussion and good dialogue, but the tough negotiations are not always like this, that you perform differently, you think differently when the pressure's on. So make sure that you prepare for your next negotiation and you're working with a framework, a mental model that can help guide you through that process when times become difficult and the pressure's on, because that's going to help you stay focused on your mission, on your purpose, on your goal. Why are we here? How do we get here? Have that roadmap laid out in front of you so you don't get taken down the wrong path and make some bad decisions and lose focus. And that happens. And we see that time and time again. So stay focused on your goal and have a mental framework to help you get there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Scott, where can people find out more about what you do and the work you're doing?
Sure. I'm active on LinkedIn. So if anybody's active on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to connect with your listeners there. Of all the social media platforms, I really find that that's a great place to exchange great professional ideas and connect with some leaders of the industry. My website is scotttillema.com. And I'm also a senior associate with the Negotiations Collective. Negotiationscollective.com is the website. You can reach me through a variety of different ways. Be happy to connect. I love talking about negotiation. I love learning about negotiation. So anybody that wants to have a chat and engage in some great negotiation dialogue, be happy to connect with you.
Yeah. I can tell you love talking about it, and it's been really insightful. And thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from international experts digging into a range of topics on conflict, power, and persuasion, subscribe to your favorite podcast app or visit us at cien.org. That's CIIAN.org.